Welcome to the program. I'm Jeff Schechtman. Deep inside our first reality TV presidency, one designed, whether you like the policy or not, to squeeze maximum drama from every encounter. It's almost hard to remember that the Obama presidency was 180 degrees the opposite. It was built on the idea of no drama. In the current context, it may look almost dull, professional, competent, and the apogee of the work of hundreds whose life effort was to serve the country and leave it a better place than they found it. That's why perhaps now more than ever we need the bracing reminder of what competency, rational decision-making, and hard work were really like in the exercise of government. My guest, Brian Abrams, does this in his comprehensive new oral history of the Obama administration. Many years ago, the late Studs Terkel first taught me the importance of interviews as oral history. During these many years, I've taken many of you with me on this journey. I look at these conversations and the kind of interviews that Brian Abrams has done for this book as pieces of long-form journalism. The interviews are a sort of drift net for catching ideas and knowledge and stretching them out through time and space in ever-widening spools. It's an important historical contribution, and Brian Abrams does it well. Brian Abrams is the author of 3 best-selling oral histories: an oral history of Late Night with David Letterman, a history of Gawker, and an oral history of Die Hard. He's written for the Washington Post magazine, Time, and numerous other publications, and it is my pleasure to welcome Brian Abrams here to talk about Obama, an oral history, 2009 to 2017. Brian, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me on the show.
A delight to have you here. Talk a little bit about the lens through which you began to have these conversations with folks in the Obama administration. Obviously, when you started working on this, and it obviously took a bunch of time, when you started working on it, the presidency and the Washington was a different place than it is today. Talk about how those external events shaped the kind of conversations that you had and your reaction to them.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm glad you asked it. It does, it connects to kind of your opening monologue, which I wanted to respond to also. It's interesting how, when I began this book in the spring of 2016, it took me roughly a year and a half, 2 years to conduct, say, I think about 112 people ended up on the record, something like that. When the book began, or the process of writing the book, I was, we were all assuming that we had a Hillary Clinton presidency ahead of us. So, for you, and I'm not blaming you for this at all. It makes perfect sense. But the way in which you frame the book is interesting to me. That we look back now on this administration with rose-colored glasses, and you use words like competency, or you have this sort of sense of an appreciation or a renewed appreciation for public service, that sort of stuff. Like, I wasn't really thinking along those lines when I put it together. I wanted to put together just a book that could objectively analyze, what went down, mistakes, achievements, both. So I wasn't trying to embrace anything warm and fuzzy necessarily. But I see your point now. I mean, it's obviously we have a kleptocratic regime in office now, so there's no contest. But I don't know if that actually answers your second part of your question. But
right. It's interesting to think about the book, though. If Hillary Clinton had been elected and we were in the midst of a Clinton presidency with whatever it came with, we'd be looking back on this in a different way. It would really be through a different lens, arguably.
Maybe, maybe not. And I think about that a lot, because if you think about the disruption for the working class, now whether that means, the sort of highly, whether that means like the Rust Belt Brexit, which gets constant, media attention, or whether that means, the millions of people whose homes were foreclosed over the last decade, just people that were really hurting, like that populist anger still would have been there, and it still would have been, well, in the case of a Hillary Clinton presidency, I would imagine still would have been very much in the hands of a Fox News to sort of rile up. And I think that when you consider that, Like, it's not like that would have gone away, right? Because it was such a tight race for 2016. Like, Hillary could have won, but she didn't. Let's say that she did. That anger would have been there, and then that would have meant that there would have been this constant retrospective about mistakes made. Like the forgotten man narrative would have still been there. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I mean, now we're seeing it in just like a whole other light. You're saying it's just a more extreme version.
Right. And I suppose the broader framework, and in looking back at this or trying to, is the story that arguably some think is apocryphal, when Nixon went to China for the first time and was sitting with Chou En-lai, and they started talking about the disruption in 1968, and they had this conversation about the French Revolution, and Nixon asked Chou En-lai what he thought the impact was of the French Revolution, and Chou En-lai turned to him and said, well, it's too soon to know. And it really spoke to this long arc of history that we have to look at all of this through.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, for all of us, and I'm obviously guilty as anyone, for all of us that, want to kind of to talk about legacies, right? Maybe the legacy that is Obama's, or if that's what you were kind of driving at, or the legacy that maybe needs to be corrected and talk about. Like, yeah, I'm obviously in those conversations every day. And, I even talk to, like, White House staffers, even after the book, just kind of on background, even over drinks, just sort of what they think. And, you get answers all over the spectrum. And yet it is true that, like, how can we really gauge until, how much, until what? Another 10 years pass if we're still around.
Right. In all of these conversations, when you look back on them all, were there any consistent themes or narratives that kind of pulled it all together for you? That they may have been subtle with some people, less so with others, but things, ideas, threads that ran throughout.
I mean, there are several. I mean, it's when you think of, like, the different groups of people that went to work for the administration, and there's just, like, these multiple classes of people. You have like, I mean, multiple. So, like, on the one level, I mean, this is just sort of this is a partial answer because that's a huge question, but I think of, like, the bright-eyed post-college, young men and women who went to work for Obama as if they were going on a Grateful Dead tour, like Howard Dean didn't quite see that, like that cult level, during his campaign. So you see that, and these are, like, these are well-educated, do-gooder, well-intended kids who just to this day will still continue to sort of act as evangelists for, the Obama White House. I think then you also have, like, veterans that have been around the block once or twice, and, they maybe they cynically played from the Clinton playbook a little too much, and that attributed to that sort of, like, quote, betrayal, or that sort of more centrist maneuvering that we saw in the White House. And then there probably were a few that just didn't enjoy working there. Again, this was a partial answer. Mm-hmm.
Was there a difference, as you saw it through these conversations, in Obama's first term versus his second term? We look at Reagan, for example, and there was a clear demarcation in the first Reagan term versus the second. Did you find anything similar with respect to Obama?
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple themes that you can look at as far as what the contrast from his first and second term, right? I mean, the most obvious thing that jumps out at me is the fact that the Democratic Party had congressional control in the first 2 years of the first term, and so that so you largely think of the first term as this sort of legislative story, and the things that were successful and that were not, and a much more intense period. I mean, we could break it down even further, right, and say the first 2 years it was just the first 2 years where there was just that legislative action taken, and then the second 2 years in that first term were just kind of this really, looking back, it's surreal that you see Obama, get caught up in this these fights over deficits and debts, which on one part was him just trying to be, the grown-up in the room, working against this obstructionist Republican caucus. And also I think you had people like Bill Daley and David Plouffe, senior advisors, that were pushing him to really lean into this idea of deficit cutting and this idea that they were chasing this like swing voter who was interested in that sort of thing. The second term is largely different than that,
And talk about how the second term is different and how the focus was different.
Yeah. I would say a couple things that jump out at me. I feel like there were factors in the public sphere that had the White House sort of turn up the volume on its response to, say, racial tensions and criminal justice reform. There was a lot of work that was done in the first term for criminal justice reform, like the Fair Sentencing Act is the first thing that comes to mind. It's sort of this idea of equaling the ratio of sentencing for drug possession between crack and cocaine, which the Reagan administration had unfairly sort of set in place. But I also think about Obama's speech at the El Reno prison in Oklahoma, like the first speech done by a sitting president at a penitentiary, and you begin to see more attention paid to how he commuted more sentences of inmates than I think something near 1,000, and that's more than the last three presidents before him put together. So that's something you see. I think you also see a lot in the sort of international diplomacy sphere, whether it's opening Burma and Cuba and the Iran deal and the Paris Accord, and you get kind of an international spotlight.
Given that there's been so much focus since Trump's been in the White House on kind of destroying Obama's legacy, do you think that there was more willingness on the part of so many of these people that you talk to really talk about what really went on and to really give people a clearer sense of Obama than they might otherwise have?
They were always difficult to meet up with or to get on the phone. Not because they are difficult people as individuals. A lot of them are actually really delightful. But because, I think everyone has their own reasons. But, some of them were just busy writing their own books.
Right.
But go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to say, you said...
Oh, okay. But I think that, a number of them may have been protective of their work and their legacy, and a lot of them are, I really tried my best to avoid speaking with people who were in the communications shop. I wanted to talk to policy people. I wanted to talk to people who were kind of in the room when the sausage was made, for lack of a better metaphor. And, who knows? These are just people that aren't necessarily used to talking to press, and who is this guy we've never heard of doing this book, and so forth. So it was always difficult. And mind you, since the interviews were done over, this year-and-a-half period, now some I spoke with multiple times before before Trump's election and after Trump's election, and some I did not. So you're getting, it's true, you're getting like sort of this rainbow of attitudes in the book, depending on when I spoke with them.
What was a sense that you came away with, the degree to which race was constantly an issue, both in the presidency and in the reaction to some of the events that took place in the country, whether it was Trayvon Martin or others, that clearly that issue was always there, sometimes at the forefront, sometimes in the back. Talk about what your sense of that was.
Well, I would say a couple things. I would say first, it's really funny how there's two white men on this podcast talking about race. But I would also say that there was a quote from Ron Davis, who ran the COPS initiative out of the Justice Department. And so he sort of headed up the police community relations, in the wake of, when you had several of these events, being captured on cell phone of police violence. And let me read it to you right now. I think I have it pulled up right here. And I do have my own opinion as well, but I think Ron's is more important. Some people say that race relations got worse under President Obama. And I thought, as an African American, that's just completely false. It's like the old thing on, quote, men don't like to go to doctors. You go to the doctor, and the doctor says, hey, you got stage 4 cancer. And you come out saying, I was okay until I saw the doctor. You were not even close to being okay. You just didn't know. So the president didn't create the tension. Circumstances in his leadership pulled the Band-Aid off of the wound that was not healing. There's since been a study that has shown that racial tensions did spike. There was a book written about this recently, that racial tensions did spike at 2008, just for the mere fact that the president was black. I think for me personally, I know every day we have this talk about this racist president that we have now and this sort of white supremacist agenda on part of the Republican Party, whether it be for immigration or for, sort of these kind of ruthless decisions made under HUD or at Health and Human Services, take your pick. But, it's important to remember, too, that under the Obama administration, it was no picnic. We were still living in a white supremacist society then, too.
Mm-hmm. Was there a difference in terms of willingness to talk and the way they viewed the Obama presidency, talking to people that were involved on the foreign policy side versus the domestic policy and political side?
Yeah, I think, what was the name of the test that Captain Kirk had to cheat in order to win in Wrath of Khan? Do you remember the Kobayashi Maru?
I don't.
So in Wrath of Khan, some of your listeners may know that Kobayashi Maru test was this sort of pilot exam for the Federation where they had to get themselves out of this tough spot, and the program was sort of set to where it was impossible for you to beat it, and the only way Captain Kirk could beat it was by cheating. But I often think about that when I think of sort of what Obama had inherited from the mess in the Middle East. He certainly didn't make it better. You see instances of him, putting troops in. You see instances of him not putting troops in. You see instances of him trying airstrikes and everything. It just, looking back, and this is way too broad of an answer, which isn't fair, but it just seems like everything was a fail. And, to which would a McCain presidency or a Romney presidency have gotten any of those decisions any better? I have no idea. This is not my expertise, obviously. But, there's definitely I think there's definitely just a darker feeling about all of that versus, say, getting 20 million Americans health care that didn't have health care before, or catalyzing a renewable energies industry, which are a little more positive notes.
Right. Or in the very early days, turning the economy around.
Yeah, that's true. There's this quote, that's funny, there's this quote from, I can't remember which book I read it in. I know I'm supposed to be talking about my own, but the expression is something along the lines of when you drive through a neighborhood, you never see a sign for cats that aren't missing. It's true that the Great Recession had hurt millions of us, and it took years for recovery. It obviously was a successful recovery. It just took forever. There are arguments to be made about could there things have been done to make it recover faster. We can talk about that, sure, but generally speaking, it's hard to give credit to something that we know didn't happen. So but I do feel like that is part of the Obama legacy, to talk about the Great Depression that never was, and how close we were to that. So I'm glad you brought that up.
What were the regrets that you heard repeatedly? What were some of the things that people wished had been different?
Medicare for all. That's the first thing that comes to mind. I think about people that I spoke with in the White House and in the Senate, and some of this didn't make it in the book just for editing purposes, and some of it was just conversation on background, but it's certainly, I mean, this message is in the part of the story, it is in the book, but, you know, this idea that even in the summer of 2009, when everyone was fully aware of this Republican obstructionist strategy to, you know, at a level that had never been seen before, that, you know, there still was a belief that the Senate could get 60 votes on a comprehensive health care reform bill, that maybe someone like a Mike Enzi of Wyoming, or you could get an Olympia Snowe in Maine, or someone, you know, some of these people in the Finance Committee, that they could have got on board, but could have gotten 60 votes. And, you know, obviously that's not true. That never was going to happen. And, you know, there are people that recognize that a sort of Medicare for all single-payer bill should have just been done under reconciliation then and called it a day, and it would have been all that much more harder for a Trump administration to try to repeal in 2016, or 2017, rather.
So much is always written about that there's no real preparation for the presidency, even among those that come to it with certainly more experience than Obama did and a lot of the people around him. Was there a sense, a certain tipping point that you found when they all felt that they had their sea legs, that it was really, for better or for worse, operating as well as it could?
Yeah, I mean, that is in the book in several spots. I mean, several scenes you do see. I mean, I think about January 20th, you have this sense of, even though, if this is what you're referring to, that even though in 2008, you know, there was a campaign that had a fully loaded transition team, and they had their policy papers, and they had, you know, they had a number of experienced people. You know, you're still talking about hundreds of staffers who all have responsibilities, and, you know, they enter the White House and they find their cubicle and the phone's already ringing on day one, and there is just this sort of like feeling of, okay, we're going to have to learn as we go, and it's remarkable that seems to happen every single time. And I suppose it's, at that point, it's just a test of the intelligence and competency and a little bit of luck on each administration to how they perform.
Right. And often so impacted by outside forces. It's like the old story about going into a prize fight, that you can have the best game plan in the world until the first punch lands. Right.
Oh, it's true. I mean, you think about, it's true. I mean, you think about, I know Obama people think about this, that like, what if the Wall Street fraudsters didn't rob millions of people of, you know, of their mortgages? You know, what if the markets didn't crash and there wasn't this giant hole in the economy, and what sort of agenda could have been set in place instead of what we saw? I mean, that's an impossible what if, because this was obviously a crisis that was building for years upon years under the sort of unregulated policies of George Bush and Bill Clinton too. And so you are, and again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying, as much as you want to like get into the weeds and criticize decisions that were made by the part of the Obama administration for their recovery from the recession, I mean, there's no question that you're certainly kind of grateful for them to respond as they did in comparison to what you might imagine a McCain administration would have done or not done.
Right. Finally, Brian, talk a little bit about your own sense of contribution to the historical record by doing this book.
Yeah. That's pretty haughty for me. I mean, so I don't know. But, I mean, if there are a stack of Obama books out there and you have credible sort of, you know, readers or historians or whoever, or there are people that, I mean, they don't have to be famous. It could be anybody who just enjoys politics and history, and they want to put my book against a stack of like, or, you know, it's not against, excuse me, but they want to put my book in a stack of other, you know, reputable Obama books. I mean, that means everything to me. You know, I guess we'll have to wait and see what people say.
And what was the most memorable conversation? Who was the most memorable to you?
Oh, wow. I mean, there were a number of people I really had a delight in speaking with. I think I really enjoy. There's just too many. But I'll say this: Gene Sperling and Jack Lew, who were both top economic advisors for President Obama, excellent storytellers. And I don't mean that in a cynical way. I mean that they are genuinely articulate and colorful storytellers, in that, especially given that what they talk about is economics. So that sounds like such a dry subject, but they'll get you fascinated. They'll get you interested in it, in a matter of seconds. It's just my opinion.
Brian Abrams, the book is Obama, An Oral History, 2009 to 2017. Brian, I thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Anytime, Jeff. Thanks so much.
Thank you.